Next talk will be given by Yulin Zhang. His talk will be about You Can't Save All the Pandas, Impossibility Results for Privacy-Preserving Tracking. The floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. So in this work, there are three characters involved, the panda, robot, and the hunter. It tells the story that the robot tries to track the panda as well as protecting it from the hunter. Our work is motivated by the following privacy-aware scenarios. As an assistant, the robot needs to gather information from the environment, including human being. If the robot follows us from the living room into the bedroom, its observation process will become more intrusive. So if the robot follows us into the bathroom we are taking a shower, things will become even worse. So to avoid tragedy from happening, we need to address the privacy for the robot. In this paper, we mainly focus on understanding the problem with which kind of privacy constraint is solvable, and also what happens if we can change the sensor power. So it is based on the following panda tracking problem proposed by O'Kane at WIFR 2008, where the panda moves unexpectedly in a two-dimensional space with a bounded velocity, and the robot carrying a quadrant sensor is tracking the panda. The sensed information is either used by the robot itself or communicated to the station. However, there's a hunter behind them. It can either directly attack the robot itself or eavesdrop on the communication. So the hunter knows everything the robot knows. To protect the panda from the hunter, the robot cannot track the panda too accurately. Robot's belief is interpreted as the geometric shape, where every point inside the shape is possible locations of the panda. So if you assume that the initial belief is a disk, after panda's movement, this belief will expand. Then the robot can make a decision to place and orient its sensor, quadrant sensor, to detect which quadrant the panda is located. So by intersecting the sensed quadrant and expanded belief, we can update the belief to the next stage. In this paper, we call the geometric represented belief as information state. To keep track of the panda, the information state should not be larger than the tracking disk. To prevent the panda from the hunter, the information state should not be smaller than the privacy disk. If we shrink down the tracking disk and make it smaller than the privacy disk, the problem will become trivial, and because there does not exist a strategy that can satisfy both bounds. So in the original panda tracking problem, they proposed a strategy for the robot to keep track of the panda. So we are asking, does this proposed strategy work for all different kinds of tracking and privacy constraints? Of course, it does not. For the trivial problems, it does not exist such a strategy. Then, for other non-trivial cases, can we find such a strategy that can satisfy both bounds forever? And also, what happens if we can use a more powerful sensor instead of the quadrant sensor? So to answer all these questions, we started with a one-dimensional panda tracking problem where both the panda and the robot move in one-dimensional space. Robot's belief is considered as an interval, and the one-dimensional sensor can detect whether the panda is in the left or right-hand side. This is analogous to the quadrant sensor. And of course, the robot can place the dividing point anywhere it wants. Similarly, the tracking disk and the privacy disk are collapsed as the lower bound and the upper bound of the information state interval. So if we can find a strategy that can satisfy the privacy bound forever, then we call it privacy preservable. If we can find a strategy that can satisfy the tracking bound forever, then we call it target trackable. So according to our analysis, we found that the existence of strategy that can satisfy both bounds depends on the panda's movement. If the panda moves really fast, there does not exist such a strategy that can satisfy both bounds. And also, if the panda's speed located in its teeth intervals, luckily we can find such a strategy. And if the panda's speed is located in these gap intervals, it either depends on the initial belief or there does not exist such a strategy. And also for the last gap, which we call a failing, we can find a privacy preservable and target trackable strategy. So to give an intuition about how we reach these conclusions, we will give an example to prove the conclusions for the failing. For the failing, as you can see, this failing is described by a set of linear constraints. So for the failing, start with the information state that satisfies both bounds. After the panda's movement, it will expand. And depend on the size of the expanded information state, there are two cases. If the expanded information state still satisfies both bounds, especially the tracking bound, then we just place the dividing point far away, and outside of the information state. And then the sensor case will not give any useful information. For the second case, if the expanded information state is larger and violate the tracking constraint, we just need to place the dividing point inside. And it turns out that there's a feasible strategy by place the dividing point in the middle. So by following this, we finally can reach the information state that satisfies both bounds. So the lemma get approved. Next, we're asking what happens if we can change the sensor power. For this particular sensor, that it can give an observation out of two subintervals. We show the conclusions of the problem with different tracking and privacy constraints in this figure, where the horizontal axis denotes the privacy bound, and the vertical axis denotes the tracking bound. And we color the conclusions as follows. If there does not exist the privacy preservable and target trackable strategy, we color it as gray. And if it depends on the initial belief, we color it as red. If we can't find such a strategy, we color it as green. So this is a figure for the, this is the result for the previous sensor. Then we are going to increase the sensor power. Where now the sensor can give observation out of 3 subintervals instead of 2. Now the sensor gets more powerful. And we found that only change happens inside this yellow rectangle, where the impossibilities changes to possibility and information state dependent case. If we keep increasing the sensor power, same changes happen. To wrap up the one-dimensional problem, we can reach the following conclusions. First, no matter how powerful sensor you use, there always exists a region that denotes the impossibility circumstances. And so the more sensing won't grant omnipotence. Also, we are interested in the information state dependent case because it has a strategy that is more complex than others. And we expect them to decrease because life will become easier when using more powerful sensor. However, when we increase in the sensor power, they didn't decrease but increase instead. Next, since all changes happen inside this yellow rectangle, we calculate all the cases that is possible and also potentially possible, which is information state dependent case. And we found that no matter when we use infinite powerful sensor, they didn't fill up all the non-trivial cases. So the capability for the robot to satisfy both bounds is bounded. Next, we are going to push the tracking capability a little bit further toward higher dimensional problems. For high dimensional problems, both the panda and the robot move in high dimensional space. Also, the robot's belief is interpreted as the geometric shape, and the quadrant sensor is generalized, where it can divide the n-dimensional space into 2 to the n cells. And the tracking constraint and the privacy constraint are generalized to tracking ball and privacy ball. We found that the existence of target trackable strategy for the 2-dimensional robot with a quadrant sensor actually implies the existence of 1-dimensional robot with a sensor that can slice the belief into 3 pieces. Similarly, for 3-dimensional problems and one-dimensional robot into 4 slices. So the hypothetical sensor we propose in 1-dimensional case, which seems contrived, is actually related to the tracking problems of practical interest. By following this and contradictory proof, we finally reached the conclusion that the higher dimensional problem is not fully target trackable. There are three pieces of work related. First is built on the information state formalism, which is well known and developed by Laval, Edelman, and others. The 2015 paper addressed the privacy for the robot. In formal verification and thesis community, finite automata is also used to trace the state. And Wu, Lafortune, Roman, and Cecilia, they allow the system to edit the output to cover the secret states. Recent work have also explored the differential model in the robots. Actually, our work lies in the discipline of information space and combinatorial filters. It did the following things. First, we discussed the existence of target trackable and privacy preservable strategy for all the problems with all different tracking and privacy constraints. And then we reached the following conclusions about the tracking possibility and initial belief dependent case, and also varying sensor power. And finally, we pushed the tracking possibility a little bit further toward higher dimensional problems. Finally, the dirty laundry slide, and there's some limitations. First, we are not the strategy for the information state dependent case is not clear. And we only examined the tracking capability for high dimensional problems. What about the privacy preserving capability? And also, we did not provide a formal sensor model for the high dimensional problems. And finally, the conclusions, there's still a long way to go toward real world sensors and programs. Thank you.
We have time for questions. Todd? Go ahead.
Okay, so the impossibility result is potentially depressing. And in the history of encryption, the key idea was to manage the complexity between your own complexity of maintaining your own privacy versus the complexity of someone else breaking the complexity. Yep. Is there a way, so if the robot is aware that the poachers are observing it, is there a way to make the complexity constraints on the poacher be so great that their ability to solve the problem is still essentially makes it impossible for them?
Well, this is a very good question, and but we are focused on different aspects. That because we assume that the robot that we assume that the hunter is extremely powerful. But you mean that what if there's a computation limit for the hunter, right?
Right. So I'm asking for some hope.
Yep.
Is actually what I'm looking for here. In the same sense that encryption, if encryption requires a key as large as the message, then it becomes deeply impractical. Nevertheless, we managed to make encryption work quite practically, and I'm hoping that there's some sort of similar analogous approach that one might take here for making privacy be practical, even if it's not globally guaranteed. That's an unfair question, I understand.
Yeah, but yeah.
So do you think that if you limit the information, is there a canonical way of limiting the information? So right now you assume that the poacher has access to everything about the robot except the ability to move the robot. So all of its internal states and all of its communication channels are available to the poacher. What is your guess in terms of what aspect of the robot's existence would you somehow firewall off to make the poacher's job harder?
Yeah, you're right. So basically, here we assume the very powerful hunter, but I think our future work can also, weaken the hunter. For example, the hunter might have some latency to, get the information. So the privacy constraint, we do not require that the privacy constraint should be satisfied for every time step. So yeah. So maybe
Okay, yeah,
yeah,
that
and
makes
the other
sense.
step, yeah.
Any other questions?
I've got a question. So,
Okay. Yeah, speak up if you can.
I'm fascinated by this boundary in your graph between the green part and the red part.
Yeah.
So there seems to be some tipping point where having extra information to start with stops being useful. Right? And I wonder if you can just give us a little insight as to why those two actually the one boundary between green and red, why does that boundary look like it does? Why does it show up with that particular kind of slant? Can you give us some insight on that?
So do you mean that there's a point that reaches the extreme point? If you if you push up a little bit up, then you become green, and if you give it down, and then it become red, right?
Yes.
Yes. So basically, this means that the privacy constraint, the tracking constraint we give, is very sensitive. Actually, yeah. So this is figure about the horizontal axis denotes the privacy constraint, and the vertical axis denotes the tracking constraint. And this extreme point means that the tracking constraint and privacy constraint will become sensitive. This is the case because here in this problem the bound we give is actually closed. The tracking bound is the tracking constraint serves as the upper bound is closed, and also the lower bound is also closed. So this closed bound will give this kind of circumstances. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think it's time for the next speaker to step up. Is there a short final question for the speaker? Well, then, if not, then let's thank the speaker again.